The man in the spotless Brioni suit looked down at Elias Reed and sneered. "You're just scrap metal. No value here. Take your toolbox and get out of my sight." Elias stood there in his oil-stained coveralls, lunchbox in one hand, 10-year-old Lily clutching the other. He said nothing. 6 months later, that same lawyer would be begging the man he humiliated to save the only thing left of his career. And the only person who could stop the bleeding was the single dad he had just thrown away. What was hiding beneath all that rust? Elias Reed had been raising Lily alone since her mother left when the girl was 4. He ran a 2-bay garage off Route 224 outside Findlay, Ohio. Most mornings he woke at 4:47 a.m., made her oatmeal with extra cinnamon, then walked her to the elementary school 3 blocks away. The rest of the day belonged to engines. He never talked about the 12 years before Lily was born. Never mentioned the 287 combat missions or the call sign painted on the side of an F-16 that once belonged to him. People saw a quiet mechanic with grease under his fingernails and assumed that was the whole story. They were wrong. Marcus Hale had arrived in Findlay the week before like a storm in Italian leather. Brioni suit, charcoal gray. Patek Philippe on his wrist that cost more than Elias's entire shop. He represented Apex Dynamics, a Detroit parts conglomerate bleeding cash after 3 failed acquisitions. Marcus had been sent to buy the last independent suppliers in Northwest Ohio and shut them down. Elias's garage sat on 4 acres of prime development land. The offer was $4.2 million. Take it or lose everything in 6 months. Elias turned it down. Marcus smiled the thin smile of a man who had never been told no. 2 days later, the county inspector showed up with a surprise demolition notice. The community board meeting that night was supposed to be a formality. Marcus stood at the podium in front of 200 locals, investors on a video screen from Detroit, and Lily sitting beside her father in the 3rd row. He adjusted his gold cuff links and spoke without notes. "This town doesn't need another broken-down garage collecting rust. It needs progress. Mr. Reed here is just scrap metal. No value here. Take your toolbox and get out of my sight." A few people laughed. Lily's small hand tightened around her father's fingers. Elias simply stood, nodded once, and walked his daughter out into the cold October air. He never raised his voice, but something inside the old pilot clicked back into place that night. Day 1. The shop smelled of fresh plywood and defeat. Marcus's crew had already hauled out the lifts, the air compressors, the shelves of carefully labeled parts. By dusk, the bays were empty except for one shape under a grease-stained tarp in the far corner. Elias stood outside on the cracked concrete, watching the last truck leave. Lily was asleep in the apartment above the garage, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He waited until the taillights disappeared down Route 224. Then he stepped inside, locked the steel door, and killed the security cameras with a single flip of the breaker. At 2:14 a.m., the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Elias walked to the corner, gripped the tarp, and pulled it back in one slow motion. The 1968 Mustang Fastback sat there, primer gray, waiting. To anyone else, the engine bay looked hopeless. Seized timing chain, warped heads, electrical gremlins no diagnostic tool could find. He worked without music, without hurry, sleeves rolled to the elbows. 43 minutes later, he slid behind the wheel, turned the key once, and the big 390 V8 caught on the first try. The growl rolled across the empty bays like distant thunder returning home. Elias sat there, eyes closed, breathing in oil and gasoline, and the faint strawberry scent of Lily's forgotten hair clip still lying on the passenger seat. For the first time in years, the man who once flew Mach 2 at 30,000 feet remembered exactly who he had been. He shut the engine down at 3:07 a.m., draped the tarp again, and climbed the wooden stairs to the apartment. Lily was still asleep. He kissed the top of her head, smelling the same strawberry shampoo, and whispered the first promise he had made in a long time. 19 days until they start tearing the rest of it down. Day 2. Elias woke at 4:47 like always, made the oatmeal, walked Lily to school. Then he drove 93 miles north in his faded pickup to a sealed bid auction in an industrial park outside Toledo. The item was Lot 17. Titanium forging dies Apex had labeled obsolete and dumped for scrap. Starting bid $32,000. He sat in the back row wearing the same Carhartt jacket he wore every winter, toolbox on the floor between his boots. When the hammer fell at $178,000, the room went quiet. Every dollar he had quietly saved for Lily's college fund. Gone in 7 seconds. But the dies were his. He signed the paperwork at 11:19 a.m. with a steady hand. The auctioneer, an old man who still remembered Elias from the air show in 2009, slid the receipt across the table without a word. Day 3. Midnight call to a trailer outside Sandusky. The retired machinist who had built the original jigs for Apex back in 1987 picked up on the second ring. Voice rough as brake pads. "Kid, you still got that Mustang?" "Still got it. Bring coffee. Black. 2 sugars. I'll be at the gate at 5:30. They met at dawn. The machinist ran his palm over the titanium dies like he was touching an old friend. Then he handed Elias a single folded piece of paper. Handwritten note from a man whose name had never appeared on any official roster. An old wingman. The note contained 3 supplier names, 2 phone numbers, and 1 sentence. "Torque is truth." Elias folded it once and slipped it into the breast pocket of his coveralls. Day 4. The first supplier contract arrived by courier at 9:02 a.m. Backdated, ironclad, never legally severed. Marcus received his copy at the temporary field office he had set up in a double-wide trailer parked on the 4 acres. He read it while standing in what used to be Bay 2. The smell of cut rebar thick in the air. His Patek read 10:47 a.m. He crumpled the letter, then smoothed it again. Still thought this was a minor inconvenience. Day 5. Elias sat in the back of a crowded patent hearing in Columbus wearing the same faded Carhartt jacket. The room smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax. He presented documentation proving that 3 critical supplier contracts Apex had canceled still legally belonged to the original license holder, him. The hearing officer, a woman who had known Elias since he changed her husband's brakes in 2011, ruled in his favor in 11 minutes flat. Certified letter hit Marcus's desk at 2:14 p.m. exactly. He stared at the signature line for a long time. The folded note stayed in Elias's pocket like a slow-burning fuse. Day 6. Another midnight run. This time to a retired inspector in Bowling Green who still owed Elias a favor from the year the Mustang's original title had gone missing. Paperwork appeared, quietly, without headlines. Each reclaimed piece of the puzzle slid into place like a piston ring seating perfectly after years of being ignored. Marcus noticed nothing. He was too busy signing the paperwork to flip the 4 acres into luxury condos priced at $679,000 each. The model unit already had a red sold sticker in the window. Day 7. Lily came home from school with a note from her teacher. Parent-teacher conference next week. She asked her dad if they could still go for ice cream after like they always did. Elias looked at the half-demolished garage through the apartment window, then back at his daughter. Every Tuesday, no matter what. She smiled the same smile her mother used to give him before she left. That night at 1:53 a.m., he started the Mustang again. Just to hear it breathe. The growl filled the bays, and for 30 seconds the future felt like something he could still steer. Day 8. The second supplier contract cleared escrow at 10 a.m. $142,000 wired from an account no one knew existed. The seller, a machinist in Toledo, sent a text at 10:07. "Fly safe, Ghost." Elias stared at the old call sign for a long time before deleting the message. The folded note in his pocket was starting to feel heavier. Day 9. Marcus stood on the future condo site at 7:15 a.m., Italian shoes already dusted with Ohio clay. He was on a conference call with Detroit, promising them the quarterly projection would still hit 41 million once the demolition was complete. In the background, a lone engine turned over somewhere behind the plywood barriers. Low, steady, almost like a warning. He told himself it was just the wind. It wasn't. Day 10. Elias sat alone in the apartment above the garage at 2:14 a.m. again. Lily was asleep down the hall. He unfolded the handwritten note from his wingman for the first time in days and read it under the desk lamp. Then he folded it again, slower this time, and placed it on the kitchen table where Lily sometimes did her homework. Promise. A countdown. 11 days left until the final board meeting in Detroit. He looked at the note, then at the faint grease print his thumb had left on the paper. Beneath all that rust something was waking up, and it still knew how to fly. Day 11. The third parts shipment arrived at dawn, 6 sealed crates from a retired Air Force depot in Nevada. Elias signed for them himself at 5:47 a.m., the driver's flashlight cutting across his grease-streaked jacket. One crate was heavier than the rest. Inside, beneath layers of foam and old canvas, lay a single turbine blade still etched with the serial number from his last squadron bird. He ran a thumb along the edge, the metal cool and familiar. The folded note stayed in his breast pocket, a quiet weight against his ribs. Marcus arrived at the site by 8 a.m., Brioni jacket slung over one arm, Patek catching the early sun. He barked orders at the 2 surveyors measuring the footprint for the new parking garage. Level it by Friday. No excuses. In the distance, the Mustang idled behind the barriers again, a low rhythmic pulse that made the surveyors glance at each other. Marcus pretended not to hear it. His shoes left perfect prints in the fresh dirt as he walked away. Day 12. Lily's teacher conference was scheduled for 3:30 p.m. Elias wiped his hands on a shop rag, changed into the only clean button-down he owned, and drove the Mustang across town. The leather seat still carried the faint smell of jet fuel from the night before. At the school, the principal, a woman in a tailored navy suit, looked him up and down. "Mr. Reed, we're concerned about Lily's focus. She keeps drawing airplanes in the margins of her math worksheets." Elias nodded once. "She gets that from her mother." He didn't mention the other drawings, the ones of tail numbers only he would recognize. He left the meeting with a parent packet in one hand and the folded note burning in his pocket like a live round. That night at 11:19 p.m., the first real snag hit. A supplier in Pennsylvania suddenly canceled the balance of the avionics order. $187,000 already paid, now frozen in a pending dispute. Elias stared at the email on his cracked laptop screen, the cursor blinking like a warning light. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in 8 years. The voice that answered on the second ring was gravel and static. "Ghost." Elias kept his tone even. "Need a quiet favor. Release the parts under the old DoD routing. Invoice 4471. A long pause, then a chuckle. "Still flying under the radar, huh?" The line went dead. 37 minutes later, the hold cleared. The parts would ship at first light. A small reversal, but it tasted like victory. The note on the kitchen table caught the lamplight, its creases deepening with every unfolding. Day 13. Marcus stood in the temporary trailer office at 9:22 a.m., sleeves rolled, negotiating with the city inspector over the demolition permits. The man in the hard hat kept glancing toward the chained gate where the Mustang sat under a faded tarp. "That thing's been running every night," the inspector said. "Neighbors are starting to complain." Marcus smiled with perfect teeth. "It's just an old mechanic playing with scrap. Gone by next week." He signed the last form with a flourish, the pen scratching across the paper like a blade. As he left, the tarp slipped just enough to reveal a fresh coat of primer on the hood. He told himself it was nothing. 19 hours until the next supplier deadline. Elias worked under the hood of the Mustang at 2:03 a.m., Lily's stuffed bear sitting on the workbench beside his tools. The bear had been hers since the funeral, One glass I always slightly crooked. He had carried it in his flight suit on 287 missions. Now it kept watch while he torqued the final bolts. The engine caught on the first try, smoother than the night before. For exactly 43 seconds, the garage filled with pure thunder. Then he shut it down. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Day 14. The bank called at 10:15 a.m. The second wire transfer had triggered a fraud alert. $54,000 held in limbo. Elias listened to the recorded voice on speaker while he wiped down the turbine blade with a soft cloth. He ended the call, pulled the folded note from his pocket, and read the last paragraph again. His wingman's handwriting was still steady after all these years. If you ever need to remind them who built this, the call sign still works. He refolded it, placed it beside Lily's bear, and made another quiet call. This one to a retired JAG officer in Virginia. The hold released by 11:40 a.m. Another piece clicked into place. The stakes stayed the same. The garage, the daughter, the life they had left. Marcus lunched at 12:30 p.m. at the new Italian place on Front Street. Spotless Italian shoes crossed at the ankle under the table. His phone buzzed with an update from the site manager. The old tenant keeps running that engine after midnight. Sounds like a jet now. Marcus set his espresso down too hard. The cup rattled. Tell him the wrecking crew comes Monday. End of story. He paid with a black Amex and left a $20 tip, but the low growl from across town seemed to follow him all the way back to the trailer. Day 15. Lily came home at 3:50 p.m. with a blue ribbon from the science fair. Her project was a cardboard model of a thrust vectoring nozzle. Elias hugged her tight, the smell of school glue and strawberry shampoo filling the small kitchen. She saw the note on the table and reached for it. He gently moved it aside. Not yet, kiddo. Soon. That night, he let her sit in the Mustang's driver's seat, while the engine idled at 1:12 a.m. The vibration traveled up through the seats, through her small hands on the wheel. For a moment, the future felt possible again. The bear rested on the dash, one glass eye reflecting the dashboard lights. 12 days until the Detroit board meeting. The core stakes had not changed. Marcus's gleaming condo towers rising on the bones of everything Elias had built in secret. But now the Mustang's exhaust note carried farther each night. And the note in Elias's pocket felt less like a memory and more like a flight plan. Day 16. A new mini-crisis arrived with the morning frost at 6:08 a.m. The city issued an emergency noise violation, citing complaints from 3 condo investors who had already put down deposits. A $27,500 fine attached if the engine fired again after 10 p.m. Elias read the certified letter while Lily ate cereal across the table. He folded it once, then slid the old handwritten note underneath it like a paperweight. The grease print from his thumb had faded but never disappeared. He spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the garage doors with salvaged steel plating, the clang of hammer on metal echoing like rivets going into an airframe. Marcus toured the future lobby at 10:45 a.m., pointing out where the marble floors would meet the glass atrium. His Patek read 10:47 when the site foreman pulled him aside. That old pilot's still welding at night. Says the Mustang is almost ready. Marcus laughed once. Sharp. Pilot? The man's a janitor with delusions. Tear the whole building down Monday. I want it gone. But when he turned to leave, the distant sound of a torque wrench ratcheting tight drifted over the plywood. It sounded exactly like the final pre-flight checks on an F-16. He told himself it was the wind again. It still wasn't. Day 17. The 4th shipment cleared customs at 9:30 a.m. but arrived missing one critical fuel control unit. Without it, the Mustang would never make the full power run. Elias stood in the empty bay at 2:51 a.m., Lily's bear in the passenger seat, the folded note open on the workbench under the work light. He read the line his wingman had underlined twice. The bird always remembers its own call sign. He closed his eyes, smelled the faint remnants of JP8 in the air, and made the decision. At 3:17 a.m., he dialed the last number he swore he would never use again. A woman answered on the first ring. "Ghost, it's been a long time." He gave her the part number and the old squadron routing code. She said nothing for 6 seconds. Then, "It'll be on your doorstep by noon tomorrow. No paperwork." The line clicked dead. Another quiet reversal. The note went back into his pocket, warmer now, alive. Marcus received the updated quarterly forecast at 11 a.m. in the trailer. The numbers were slipping. Only 39 million projected instead of 41. He slammed the report onto the desk, the sound sharp as a canopy closing. Outside, the Mustang turned over at exactly 11:03. Low, steady, promise riding on the wind. He stared at the plywood barrier until the engine note faded, then loosened his Brioni tie by 1 precise inch. For the first time, the Italian shoes felt a little tight. Day 18. Lily's teacher sent another note home at 4:12 p.m. This one asked if everything was all right at home. Elias read it while the Mustang cooled in the far bay, its new fuel control unit already installed and torqued to spec. He set the paper beside the folded note and the stuffed bear. 3 objects now lined up like instruments on a panel. The bear's crooked eye seemed to watch them all. He told Lily they would still get ice cream on Tuesday. She believed him. That belief was becoming the only fuel that mattered. 10 days until the final board meeting in Detroit. The hidden call sign had leaked a little further into the open. The garage still stood, scarred but breathing. And somewhere beneath the rust and the doubt, the original owner of this entire block was remembering exactly how high he used to fly. The debt was still being collected, one midnight roar at a time. The sun had barely cleared the horizon on day 19 when the first parts truck rolled in. Elias was already under the Mustang's belly, the smell of fresh 15W50 drifting up like old jet exhaust. He heard the diesel idle drop to an idle, then the clack of expensive heels on cracked concrete. Marcus stopped 3 feet short of the lift. "You're burning through money that isn't yours. Read. Those aren't catalog parts. My auditors want receipts." Elias slid out on the creeper, the folded note riding warm against his heart. "They're paid for. By who?" Marcus's Patek caught the early light, 7:42 a.m. exactly. "We're down to 37 million in the latest projection." The board's already whispering Chapter 11. Elias wiped his hands on a blue shop rag that smelled of solvent and yesterday's regret. He said nothing. Marcus's jaw worked once. Then he spun on those Italian soles and left. The door slammed like an afterburner light off. 19 hours until the next parts shipment. By 10:15 a.m., the second mini-crisis landed. The city inspector arrived unannounced, clipboard in hand, citing an anonymous complaint about unpermitted heavy equipment noise. He wanted the Mustang moved off the lift by close of business or he'd red-tag the whole garage. Elias watched the man's polished wingtips tap an impatient rhythm on the oil-stained floor. He reached into the tool chest, pulled out the old squadron patch he kept wrapped in the same rag, and laid it face down so the inspector wouldn't see the faded ghost call sign. "Give me until tomorrow," the inspector smirked. "Tomorrow's not on the form." Elias felt the debt tighten another notch. He made a single phone call at 11:03. Same woman, same voice, different routing code. She laughed once, low. "You're making me earn my pension, Ghost." At 1:47 p.m. a different unmarked van arrived. 2 men in plain coveralls carried a sealed crate the size of a coffin. "No manifest. No signature." The inspector was still circling the block in his city sedan when the crate was already bolted to the engine stand. Inside lay a refurbished turbine blade set, serial numbers ground off but tolerances still within 0.0003. The Mustang's heartbeat just got stronger. Small reversal. The inspector returned at 4:05 p.m., found the lift empty, the car tucked behind a false wall of empty 55-gallon drums. The red tag pen stayed in his pocket. He left muttering about paperwork. Elias watched the taillights disappear, then placed the folded note on the workbench again. The paper had started to take on the faint scent of JP8 from his fingers. The stuffed bear sat beside it, one glass eye catching the overhead fluorescence like a radar warning light. Lily came home from school at 3:58 p.m. carrying another note. This one was from the guidance counselor. We're concerned about her focus. She keeps drawing airplanes during math. Elias read it at the kitchen table while macaroni water boiled. He folded the counselor's letter once, laid it with the others, and let the bear's crooked gaze rest on all three. "Tuesday still on for ice cream?" she asked, voice small. "Tuesday," he said, the word solid as throttle lock. Day 20. The temperature dropped overnight. At 2:14 a.m. Elias was alone in the bay again, the concrete cold enough to bite through his boots. He had the hood up, torque wrench in hand, when the laptop on the bench chirped. An encrypted email, subject line only 3 characters, G19. Inside was a single line of coordinates and a bank routing number that ended in 4471. The transfer had already cleared. $287,000. No explanation. He closed the laptop. The sound echoed like a cockpit latch. Marcus arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, wearing a fresh Brioni suit the color of midnight. The Italian shoes looked even tighter today. He dropped a fresh set of spreadsheets on the workbench. The paper slapped hard. 34 million now. The Detroit board moved the final meeting up. 9 days. They're sending their own mechanics to value the fleet. If that rust bucket is still here, they'll scrap it on site. Elias kept his eyes on the torque specs. They can try. Marcus leaned in, voice low enough that the overhead fans almost swallowed it. I built this company from nothing, Reed. You're just the janitor who won't leave. When this is over, I'll make sure your name is the first one on the severance list. The words landed like a missile lock tone. Elias felt the old call sign stir again, deeper this time. He waited until Marcus's Mustang, his own, the silver one, had roared away at 8:17 a.m. Then he pulled the note from his pocket, read the underlined line once more, and tucked it beside the bear. The paper was starting to feel like part of his flight suit. Day 21. Mini Crisis arrived at 10:22 a.m. in the form of a repo crew. 3 men, 2 flatbeds, 1 nervous lawyer holding a court order. The bank, tipped by an anonymous email, had accelerated the floor plan loan. They wanted every vehicle on the lot, including the one currently missing its intake manifold. Elias stood in the doorway, arms crossed, the faint smell of turbine oil still on his sleeves. The lead repo man pointed at the false wall. "We know it's back there." Elias said nothing. He simply walked to the breaker panel and killed every light in the building. In the sudden dark, the only sound was the repo crew's breathing and the distant whistle of a freight train 3 blocks over. 30 seconds later, the emergency generator kicked on, exactly as it had been programmed to do during 287 combat missions. The lights flared again, but now they lit up a different bay door rolling open. A single black trailer sat outside, engine running. On its side, small white letters, U.S. government surplus, do not remove. The repo lawyer blinked. "That's federal." "It is," Elias said quietly, "and it's not on your list." The crew left at 11:04 a.m. The lawyer's signature on the hold notice trembled. Another small reversal. That night Lily couldn't sleep. She dragged her blanket into the garage at 12:47 a.m. and curled up in the old desk chair while Elias torqued the last cylinder head bolt. The stuffed bear rested on her lap like a co-pilot. He told her the story of a bird that once flew so high the sky forgot its name, until the bird decided to come home. She fell asleep before the ending. He carried her back to the house at 1:33 a.m., bear tucked under one arm, the folded note now resting inside the bear's worn overalls. The paper had started to feel like a living thing, warm from body heat and memory. Day 22. The hidden call sign had leaked further. A parts supplier in Ohio accidentally addressed the next overnight crate to Captain E. Ghost Reed, Rhett. Marcus found the label at 9:15 a.m. He stood in the trailer office for a long minute, the paper shaking slightly in his manicured fingers. He did not confront Elias. Instead, he loosened his tie another half-inch and stared at the plywood barrier that separated the garage from the executive lot. The debt was growing teeth. 8 days until Detroit. The Mustang's engine note was no longer a whisper. It was a low, steady growl that carried on the morning wind, the same frequency it had once used to shake the desert floor at 40,000 feet. Elias closed the bay door at 4:58 p.m., wiped his hands, and laid the note on the bench one more time. The bear watched from its place beside the quarterly reports that now read 31 million. The original owner of the entire block was no longer hiding beneath the rust. He was simply waiting for the right altitude to show everyone exactly how high he used to fly. And the note, warmer than ever, waited with him. The clock on the garage wall read 6:12 a.m. on day 23. Marcus arrived early, Italian loafers already dusted with gravel from the lot. He stood outside the bay door listening to that growl again, deeper now, almost subterranean. When Elias finally stepped out for coffee, Marcus cleared his throat. Ghost, huh? Elias didn't blink. Old nickname, doesn't pay the electric bill. Marcus let it drop, but his Patek Philippe caught the sunrise at an odd angle as he walked away, and the second hand seemed to hesitate. Lily was waiting inside with 2 pieces of toast and the bear. The stuffed animal's left ear had come unstitched again during the night. She held it out like evidence. He's tired, Dad. Like you. Elias smiled, folded the note once more, and slipped it back into the bear's overalls. The paper felt heavier each time, as if the words themselves were gaining altitude. Day 24. The parts crate from Ohio arrived at 10:27 a.m. Inside were not only the custom intake runners Elias had ordered, but a small velvet pouch that had clearly been added by hand. Marcus watched from the trailer window as Elias opened it. A set of faded lieutenant's bars and a single brass key on a keychain shaped like a miniature turbine blade. The supplier had written on the packing slip in careful block letters, "For the man who brought 18 of us home from Kandahar, 2009. Fly safe, Captain." Elias closed the crate fast, but not before Marcus saw. The polished executive stood motionless for 43 seconds, then turned and walked back to his leased Mercedes without a word. His shoes left perfect prints in the dust. That afternoon, a new mini-crisis landed like a bird strike. At 2:14 p.m., the city inspector showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, citing a 2017 noise ordinance nobody had mentioned before. The Mustang's dyno runs were now officially too loud for a commercial zone. If the decibel readings didn't drop within 72 hours, the entire property would be red-tagged. Marcus stood beside the inspector in a fresh Brioni suit the color of wet slate, arms crossed, saying nothing. But his jaw worked like a man tasting his own mistake. Elias listened without interrupting. Then he simply nodded once and said, "Understood." He spent the next 19 hours modifying the exhaust in complete silence except for the soft clink of tools and Lily's occasional humming while she sat on a milk crate, bear in her lap. The note stayed inside the overalls like a heartbeat. At 9:51 p.m., he fired the engine again. The growl had become a purr, low enough to pass any meter yet still carrying that same frequency that once rattled cockpit glass at Mach 1.2. The inspector returned the next morning, took 3 readings, and left without writing a ticket. Marcus watched from the far side of the lot, hands in his pockets, the manicure now chipped at the thumb. Day 26. The debt kept collecting in small, precise increments. A reporter from the local business journal called the main office at 11:03 a.m., asking about rumors of a vintage aircraft engineer working out of the surplus yard. Marcus took the call in his glass office, voice tight. He denied everything. then hung up and stared at the plywood barrier again. Behind it, Elias was teaching Lily how to torque a banjo fitting on the brake line. The bear sat on the fender wearing a child-sized pair of safety goggles Elias had found in a forgotten toolbox. The note inside its overalls had started to smell faintly of jet fuel and old paper. Day 27. 19 hours until the next round of bank paperwork was due. The bank loan officer arrived at 8:40 a.m. in a charcoal suit and wire-rimmed glasses that cost more than most people's rent. She carried a fresh valuation packet that listed the entire 7-acre parcel at $4.2 million less than the previous appraisal. Marcus had requested the reevaluation himself 2 weeks earlier, back when he still believed the yard was worthless scrap. Now the numbers were biting him. The officer laid the packet on the trailer desk and said the words Marcus had once loved hearing. Non-performing asset. Foreclosure proceedings can begin in 14 days if the balloon payment isn't met. Elias stood in the doorway, coveralls streaked with carbon, and said nothing. The loan officer glanced at him once, then twice. Something in his posture made her pause. "You look familiar," she said. "Did you ever testify before the House Armed Services Committee in 2014? Elias gave the smallest shrug. "Long time ago." She left 10 minutes later with a revised hold notice. The signature on it was steady this time. Marcus remained seated, tie now completely loosened, staring at the new set of documents like they had grown teeth and learned to read. Day 28. The hidden call sign had reached Detroit. An email arrived at 6:55 a.m. from the auction house itself. Subject line: Lot 17 to 1967 Shelby, GT 500, Provenance Inquiry. Attached were 3 old black and white photos of a desert airstrip, a man in a flight suit standing beside the very same Mustang, and a tail number that matched the faded sticker still half visible under the passenger door. The email asked for authentication. Marcus forwarded it to Elias without comment. The timestamp on his forward read 7:02 a.m. Elias read it once, closed the laptop, and went back to fitting the new drive shaft. The clunk of metal on metal filled the garage like a slow clock. Lily arrived after school at 3:47 p.m., dragging her backpack and the bear. She had drawn a new patch for the overalls, a tiny ghost outlined in crayon. Elias let her help tape it on. The folded note shifted inside as they worked, warmer than the engine block after a hard run. Day 29. 12 hours until the final pre-auction inspection team from Detroit was scheduled to arrive. A fresh crisis rolled in at 4:19 p.m. in the form of a flatbed truck carrying a wrecked 1970 Boss 429 that Marcus had impulsively bought at a police auction the week before, thinking he could flip it for quick cash to help cover the balloon payment. The truck driver dropped it in the middle of the executive lot like a dead whale. The car was a disaster. Twisted frame, seized engine, bullet holes in the quarter panel from some forgotten chase. Marcus stood beside it in $1,000 shoes now scuffed beyond repair and looked, for the first time, genuinely lost. Elias walked over, wiped his hands on a rag, and circled the wreck once. He crouched, ran one finger along the bullet holes and said quietly, "Same caliber we used to dodge in Hellman." Marcus didn't answer. He simply stared at the ruin of his bright idea. That night, the garage lights stayed on until 2:29 a.m. Elias and Lily worked side by side, the bear standing sentry on the workbench. They didn't fix the Boss, that would come later. Instead, Elias used its intact rear axle as a template to finish the Mustang's suspension geometry. Every measurement he called out, Lily repeated like a co-pilot. The note stayed tucked in the bear's overalls, moving when she moved, a quiet passenger on every small victory. At 2:51 a.m., the Mustang's engine turned over with a sound like distant thunder wrapped in silk. Marcus, who had been pretending to work late in the trailer, stood at the window and watched the headlights sweep across the plywood barrier. His reflection looked older than it had 30 days ago. Day 30. 8 hours until the Detroit team arrived. The phone in the trailer rang at 7:14 a.m. The auction house again. They had received an anonymous letter postmarked from Ohio, the same supplier, vouching for the Mustang's combat history and including a copy of a 2007 commendation signed by a 3-star general. The letter mentioned the call sign Ghost exactly once. Marcus listened to the entire message on speaker, then pressed delete with a finger that trembled only slightly. He walked into the garage at 7:41 a.m. Elias was under the car on a creeper, Lily handing him wrenches. The bear sat nearby wearing its new crayon patch and carrying its secret passenger. Marcus stopped 3 feet from the lift. The smell of grease and hot metal and something like ozone filled the air between them. "I didn't know," he said. The words came out hoarse. Elias slid out, stood up, and looked at the man in the now rumpled Brioni suit. "You didn't ask." Marcus swallowed. The Patek on his wrist read 7:44 a.m. outside. The first hint of the Detroit team's convoy could be heard on the county road low. Expensive engines moving in formation. The Det had teeth now, and it was smiling. The first Detroit sedan rolled through the gate at 8:03 a.m. on day 30. Its driver wore mirrored Oakleys and carried a tablet like a surgical instrument. 3 more cars followed in tight formation, chrome flashing under the weak Michigan sun. Marcus met them in the yard, Brioni coat buttoned high against the chill. He smelled of yesterday's cologne and fresh panic. "Gentlemen," he began, voice pitched for boardrooms, "you'll see we've made remarkable progress." Elias stayed under the Mustang, ratchet clicking like a metronome. Lily crouched beside him, passing sockets without being asked. The bear sat on an overturned 5-gallon bucket, its single button eye reflecting the overhead fluorescence. The folded note inside its overalls rustled every time she shifted her weight. Marcus guided the visitors into the garage at 8:17 a.m. Their expensive shoes clicked on concrete still stained with 30 days of spilled 10W40. The lead inspector, a man named Reynolds with a Hermes tie clip, stopped 6 feet from the lift and stared at the half-assembled shell. "This is what you're presenting at the block tomorrow?" Reynolds asked, voice flat. "It looks like a science fair project held together by hope and zip ties." Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Elias slid from beneath the car, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been a hotel towel. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the far wall, lifted a dusty tarp, and revealed the Boss 429 engine sitting on a stand like a sleeping dragon. The smell of fresh machine oil and preserved cosmoline drifted across the garage. Reynolds blinked once. "That's original equipment?" "Every bolt," Elias said quietly. "Serial numbers match the chassis plate I pulled last week. Invoice number 4471 from the 2007 restoration log." The inspectors circled the engine like sharks that had just smelled blood. Marcus stood off to the side, Patek catching the light every time his hand twitched. At 8:29 a.m., Reynolds turned to him. "You told our office this was scrap." Marcus's Adam's apple bobbed. "I was misinformed. Day 31, 19 hours until the auction." The Detroit team left at 10:12 a.m. after photographing every weld, every serial stamp, every measurement Elias had taken at 2 a.m. the night before. They promised to return at 0600 tomorrow with the full appraisal panel. Marcus spent the rest of the morning on the phone in the trailer, voice rising and falling like a man negotiating with a hurricane. Elias and Lily worked through lunch. At 1:47 p.m., the alternator bracket cracked under torque. Lily's small hands went still. The bear watched from the fender, its crayon patch now streaked with fingerprint smudges. Elias stared at the ruined part for 12 full seconds. Then he reached into a dented toolbox, pulled out a carbon fiber bracket he had machined himself in Afghanistan between missions, and bolted it in place without explanation. The fit was perfect. The note in the bear's overalls stayed silent. Marcus appeared at 3:22 p.m. carrying 2 lukewarm coffees from the gas station 4 miles away. He set one beside the bear without looking at it. "I called in every favor I had left," he said. His Italian shoes were scuffed now, leather dull from concrete dust. They're sending a specialist. Someone who authenticates military provenance for Barrett Jackson. He lands at Detroit Metro at 7 p.m. tonight. Elias didn't look up from the wiring harness. Good. Marcus lingered. The ozone smell had faded, replaced by the sweeter odor of fresh solder. That letter this morning, the one with the 3-star signature. You send it? Elias finally met his eyes. Does it matter? Marcus looked at the bear, looked at Lily's small fingers looping zip ties around brake lines, looked at the man whose hands moved with the calm precision of someone who had once flown 287 combat sorties in aircraft that didn't officially exist. I'm starting to think I never asked the right questions, Marcus said. Day 32, 11 hours until the auction. The specialist arrived at 8:41 p.m. in a rented Suburban that still carried the scent of airport rental carpet. Dr. Alan Voss, retired Air Force colonel turned auction authenticator, wore a navy windbreaker over a dress shirt and carried a battered aluminum briefcase that had seen every desert on 2 continents. He shook Elias's hand once, firmly, and something passed between them that Marcus couldn't read. Voss spent 90 minutes crawling over the Mustang with a borescope and a jeweler's loop. At 10:13 p.m. he straightened, knees popping, and looked at the faded ghost stencil still visible on the firewall. I've seen this bird before, Voss said. Taliban supply run, November 2008. I was on the ground that night. Thought the pilot was dead when the RPG took out his starboard engine. Elias remained silent. Lily hugged the bear tighter. The note inside its overalls crinkled like dry leaves. Voss turned to Marcus. You realize what you have here, Mr. Hale? Marcus's voice came out smaller than it had in 32 days. I'm learning. Voss closed his briefcase with a soft click. Tomorrow's panel will want blood. These cars don't come with provenance like this unless someone important wants the story buried. You'll need more than photos and one anonymous letter. He left at 10:47 p.m. The garage lights stayed on again. Day 33. For hours until the auction. The new crisis arrived at 2:14 a.m. via email on Marcus's laptop. The Detroit house had received a second anonymous tip. This one claiming the Mustang's VIN had been cloned from a wreck in Ohio. The panel was threatening to pull the car from the block unless a verified chain of custody appeared within 90 minutes. Marcus read the message aloud in a voice that cracked on the word, fraud. Elias was asleep in the lawn chair, head tipped back, grease still under his fingernails. Lily had curled up on an old army blanket beside him, the bear tucked under her arm like a co-pilot on final approach. Marcus stood over them for a long time, the trailer's fluorescent buzzing overhead. At 2:51 a.m. he knelt, gently lifted the bear from Lily's grip, and carried it to the workbench. His hands shook as he unbuttoned the overalls. The folded note slid into his palm. He opened it under the work light. The handwriting was neat, military. The date at the top read March 14, 2009. The signature at the bottom belonged to Captain Elias J. Reed, United States Air Force. The text was simple. If you're reading this, little bear, it means I didn't make it home. Tell Lily her daddy loved her more than flying. Tell the man who finds you that the Mustang was never scrap. It was waiting. Marcus read it twice. His eyes burned. The Patek on his wrist read 3:07 a.m. He walked back to the sleeping father and daughter, carefully tucked the note back into the bear's overalls, set the bear exactly where Lily had left it, one paw resting against Elias's sleeve. Then Marcus did something he hadn't done since business school. He made a phone call at 3:22 a.m. to the only person who still owed him a favor bigger than pride. Day 34. 47 minutes until the auction. The county fairgrounds parking lot smelled of diesel, wet asphalt, and funnel cake grease. 47 high-end collector cars sat under tents while bidders in pressed jackets sipped espresso from a hospitality truck. The Mustang occupied stall 19, half covered by a blue tarp that Marcus had refused to remove until the exact moment. Reynolds from the Detroit house stood at the podium at 9:13 a.m., reading the revised lot description in a tone that suggested he was swallowing glass. Lot 19, 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1 prototype. Verified combat history, 287 documented missions. Call sign, Ghost. A murmur rippled through the 200 people gathered. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. Elias stood at the back in the same oil-stained coveralls he'd worn for 34 days. Lily beside him holding the bear like a shield. The crayon patch had started to peel at one corner. Marcus stood 3 feet away, Brioni suit now carrying faint streaks of garage grease that he had stopped trying to brush off. The bidding opened at $87,000. It climbed in increments of $5,000 while Reynolds read the newly authenticated documents aloud. Each number landed like hammer blows. $142,000, $189,000, $234,000. At $317,000, the specialist Voss stepped forward from the crowd and raised his paddle once. The room went still. Voss's voice carried across the tent, calm and final. I will personally guarantee the provenance. This car saved my life on a ridge outside Kandahar. Its pilot brought it home on one engine and a prayer. That pilot is standing in the back of this tent right now. Every head turned. Elias didn't move. Lily buried her face in the bear's overalls. The note inside rustled once, like a breath finally released. Marcus stared at the man he had once called scrap metal. The debt had teeth, and for the first time in 34 days, those teeth were no longer smiling at him. The gavel stayed raised. The next bid would decide everything. But the real auction wasn't about money anymore. It was about who would speak first when the final number fell. The first paddle after Voss's revelation lifted at $270,000. A crisp snap in the humid air. Then 3 more in quick succession. The tent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets. Elias kept his boots planted on the oily concrete. Lily's small hand found the hem of his coveralls and held on. The bear's single remaining button. I stared back at him, unblinking. Marcus's phone vibrated in his suit pocket for the 6th time that morning. He ignored it. Reynolds cleared his throat. Current bid stands at $317,000. Do I have $325? A man in a charcoal Tom Ford suit near the front raised his paddle. Reynolds pointed. $325 to the gentleman in row 3. Marcus felt the grease on his own cuffs now. Dark smudges that had migrated from the Mustang's undercarriage during the long nights of authentication. He no longer cared. Day 34, 9:21 a.m. The next mini-crisis arrived without warning. A woman in a navy blazer pushed through the side entrance carrying a thick manila folder. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete. She was the county assessor's chief auditor, name tag reading K. Delgado. She walked straight to the podium and leaned in to whisper something to Reynolds. The auctioneer's face tightened. Reynolds tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a temporary hold. The provenance documents just received an expedited challenge from the state tax authority. They're claiming the combat logs were never officially declassified. A groan rolled through the crowd. Phones lowered. Someone in the back shouted, "This is a stall tactic." Delgado turned to face the room, voice clipped. Until the challenge is resolved, Lot 19 cannot be sold. The car will be impounded pending review. That is the law. Elias felt the old weight settle back onto his shoulders. 34 days of stripped paint, late-night sanding, and quiet phone calls to retired colonels. And now this. Lily squeezed the bear tighter. The folded note inside crinkled again. The same note he had carried since Kandahar. The one that simply read, "Bring her home, Ghost." Marcus stepped forward before he could stop himself. His Italian loafers, once spotless, now left faint black prints. How long will the review take? Minimum 72 hours, Delgado said. Possibly longer if we have to subpoena Pentagon records. The tent buzzed with frustration. Bidders began checking flights on their phones. Voss crossed his arms, jaw set. Elias spoke for the first time in 40 minutes, voice low but carrying. The logs are sealed under Title 10, Section 130, but the after-action report from Mission 214 was cleared for release in 2018. Check invoice number 4471, stamped by Colonel H. Whitaker, Ramstein Air Base. Delgado blinked. And you are someone who knows the difference between a stamp and a signature. She opened the folder, flipped pages. Her fingers stopped. The color left her face. Reynolds leaned over. He's right. Page 17. It's there. Delgado's shoulders dropped half an inch. She closed the folder. The challenge is withdrawn. Proceed. A scatter of applause broke out. Marcus watched Elias, really watched him for the first time since the garage floor. The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't needed to. 41 minutes until the auction resumed. The second escalation came at 9:37 a.m. A black Suburban rolled into the parking lot. Lights off but engine loud. Two men in dark suits stepped out. Federal plates. One carried a tablet. The other held a rolled-up writ. They walked straight toward the Mustang. The taller agent stopped 3 feet from Elias. Mr. Reed, we have a federal interest in this vehicle. National security hold under the 2009 Material Protection Act. You're the registered owner of record from 2004. The car was never properly decommissioned. The crowd went dead quiet. Lily looked up at her father. The bear's crayon patch flapped loosely now, one edge completely torn. Marcus felt his stomach twist. He had started this mess with one arrogant sentence in a garage. Asterisk scrap metal. No value. Asterisk now the government wanted the car and, by extension, the man who flew it. Elias reached into the left chest pocket of his coveralls. He pulled out a small, weathered leather wallet thinner than a passport. Inside was a card no one in the tent had seen before. Gold edges. A faded eagle. Call sign Ghost is still active on the retired roster, he said quietly. Check serial R 7714. Clearance level still reads Delta Echo. The agent scanned the card with his tablet. The screen flashed green. He looked up, stunned. Sir, my apologies. We were not briefed. The second agent lowered the writ. We'll stand down. They backed away. The Suburban left the lot in reverse. Marcus's mouth had gone dry. He remembered the first night he had watched Elias work under the car. The way the man's hands never shook. The way every bolt came free like it remembered him. 36 minutes until final bids. The grind continued. Reynolds brought the gavel down twice to settle the room. Bidding resumed at $325,000. Climbed again in steady, brutal increments. 412. 489. 560. Each jump tightened the air like a ratchet. At 585,000, a new bidder entered from the hospitality truck. A woman in her late 40s wearing a simple gray sweater. No designer labels. She raised her paddle calmly. Reynolds pointed. 600,000 to the new bidder in the back. Voss turned, recognizing her. He gave a single respectful nod. She was the widow of Captain Michael Reyes, the man Elias had pulled from a burning wreck on Mission 183. She had driven 9 hours after seeing the first viral clip of the Mustang. Her eyes never left Elias. Lily tugged her father's sleeve. Daddy, she's crying. Elias gave the smallest nod. The bear's note rustled again in Lily's arms, as if the paper itself remembered every flight, every mayday, every time Ghost had refused to leave a man behind. Marcus stepped closer to Elias without realizing it. The Brioni jacket now carried the full smell of brake cleaner and old leather. He spoke under his breath, the first private words in 34 days. I was wrong. Elias didn't look at him. Not yet. The gavel hasn't fallen. 29 minutes until the auction would close. A fresh mini-crisis surfaced at 9:51 a.m. The hospitality truck suddenly lost power. The espresso machine died mid-brew. Lights inside the tent flickered once, twice. Then the entire generator outside coughed and went silent. The tent plunged into gray morning light. Phones began beeping low battery warnings. Reynolds tapped the dead microphone. Nothing. Bidders started shuffling, uneasy. A collector from Miami muttered, "This is sabotage." Elias handed Lily the bear, walked to the side of the stage, and knelt beside the main power junction box. He popped the cover with a screwdriver he had kept in his back pocket since day one. Grease-blackened fingers moved with the same calm precision he had used on turbine blades at 30,000 feet. Marcus watched, unable to look away. 40 seconds later, the generator coughed back to life. Lights surged. The microphone popped. Reynolds's voice returned mid-sentence. Current bid stands at $640,000. The widow in the gray sweater raised her paddle again. Elias returned to his daughter. The bear's overalls now carried a fresh thumbprint of garage oil right over the crayon patch. Lily didn't mind. She pressed the stuffed animal to her cheek and whispered something only the note inside could hear. Marcus felt the last of his old certainty crumble. He had spent 34 days watching a man most people saw as a broke single dad in stained coveralls quietly dismantle every obstacle placed in front of him. Not with shouting, not with lawyers, with knowledge, with patience, with the kind of competence that only comes from having carried other men's lives in your hands at Mach 1. The bidding hit 710,000. The tent smelled now of cooling diesel, cooling tempers, and the faint sweetness of Lily's strawberry shampoo. 21 minutes until the final fall of the gavel. Another small reversal waited in the wings. A young reporter from the local news station had been filming the entire morning. She lowered her camera, walked straight to Marcus, and held out her phone. On the screen was a still image from a 2000s mission debrief. The pilot's face was blurred, but the call sign on the flight suit was unmistakable. Ghost. The reporter's voice was soft. "Mr. Hale, did you know you hired the original test pilot for the entire Mach 1 block?" Marcus looked at the image, then at Elias. The man hadn't moved. Didn't need to. Marcus's reply came out hoarse. "I'm beginning to understand that now." He slipped the phone back to the reporter and turned toward Elias. The debt between them had grown teeth, yes. But those teeth were no longer biting the man who once wore the oil-stained coveralls. They were turning, slowly, deliberately, toward the man in the ruined Brioni suit. 17 minutes until the auction would end. The grind tightened again. Bids climbed to 760, then 805. The widow raised once more at 820. Voss countered at 850. A phone bidder from overseas jumped to 900,000 flat. Each number landed heavier than the last. Lily yawned against her father's leg. The bear's head lolled on her shoulder, the torn crayon patch now fully detached and dangling by a single thread. Elias reached down and tucked the patch into his own pocket, a small protective motion no one else noticed. Marcus felt his pulse in his throat. He had come here 34 days ago to liquidate what he thought was worthless metal. Instead, he had dismantled his own certainty one greasy fingerprint at a time. The real auction still wasn't about money. It was about the moment the final bidder would be forced to speak the pilot's name out loud, and about whether Marcus would be brave enough to speak first. 14 minutes remained on the clock when the next self-contained crisis dropped. Reynolds's assistant rushed the stage holding a printed email. The auctioneer read it, face paling. He covered the microphone. Lot 19 has just been entered into a competing online auction by a holding company in Luxembourg. They claim prior lien rights based on a 2011 storage contract Elias Reed never paid. The crowd erupted. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. Then he pulled the same worn leather wallet from his coveralls again. This time he removed a different paper. A single receipt yellowed at the edges. Invoice number 4471. Paid in full, Ramstein Motor Pool, March 14, 2012. Witnessed by 2 master sergeants. He handed it to Reynolds without a word. The auctioneer scanned it, then read the key line aloud over the now working microphone. Payment confirmed.
Lien extinguished.
The online auction vanished from the big screen behind him in real time. A cheer went up. Marcus felt his knees loosen. He had watched the same man solve every new problem with nothing more than paper, memory, and the kind of silence that carried the weight of 287 combat missions. The symbolic weight of the bear's note had never felt heavier in Lily's small arms. 11 minutes until the gavel. The bids surged past 1,100,000. The widow in gray raised her paddle one final time. Her voice, when she spoke, cracked across the tent like breaking ice. 1.4 million, and I will never sell her. She belongs to the man who brought my husband home. The tent fell into a hush so complete the diesel generator outside sounded like distant thunder. Elias looked at her. A single nod passed between them, the kind only people who have heard the same mayday call can share. Marcus felt the last of his polished armor crack wide open. The Brioni suit no longer mattered. The Patek on his wrist felt like dead weight. He took one step closer to the man he had once dismissed in front of his own daughter. The debt had teeth, and those teeth were finally, fully aimed at the man who deserved them. 9 minutes left. The grind had become something sharper now. Every second carried the same stakes, the same slow leak of the hidden identity, the same rustle of folded paper inside a child's stuffed bear. The auction was no longer a sale. It was a confession waiting to be spoken in front of 200 witnesses. And Marcus Hale, once so certain behind his perfect Italian shoes, understood that the next words out of his own mouth would either redeem him or finish him.